Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron is up this week.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table today?
I'm bringing the newest zine from Interrupting Criminalization to the table. It was written by Melanie Brazzell and Andrea Ritchie and is called Transformative Justice Under Authoritarianism, Volume 1, a conversation with the YoNoFui Collective of Argentina. Mm-hmm. And this zine is a continuation of the resource we read back in 2024, which was called Transformative Justice Knows No Borders.
Yes.
And our episode about that was called Transformative Justice Around the World.
Ooh, check it out, folks.
Yeah. And I thought I'd introduce this a little bit more with this quote from the first page.
Okay.
Two core curiosities animated the project. If abolitionist analysis shows us how death-making powers are linked internationally and intersectionally, like a monster with many tentacles, then how do we thread together our varied forms of resistance to fight back? The second was a sense that more people around the world are practicing what we in the United States call abolition transformative justice than we are aware of. Yeah, right? And so I really appreciated this zine because it highlights some incredible work that YoNoFui is doing to resist their own authoritarian in Argentina, and linking that to the historical patterns of repression and the neoliberal carceral order that has been accepted as the norm in Argentina and in many places across the world, including right here in the United States.
Unfortunately.
But that's enough from me for the introduction. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it was really great to learn more about all of the incredible work that YoNoFui has been doing down in Argentina. I think their work is so important and necessary, as you say, given the authoritarianism that actively exists there, but also I think just given the general imperative for our collective survival and our collective liberation that we're all sort of working towards. And so that to me was really important and a really important takeaway from this zine. And so I'm glad you found it. It was also fascinating, I hate to use that word, to learn more about Argentina's right-wing president, Javier Milei, because he's doing a lot, and there's a lot I just don't know about him and what's happening there. So this was an opportunity to sort of educate myself about that. But they share this in the zine, quote, Argentina is currently under the increasingly authoritarian leadership of Javier Milei, who came to power in 2023 and is a close ally of the current regime in the United States, which has praised Milei's economic policies, anti-migrant violence, crackdown on labor unions, attacks on the left, and efforts to suppress and silence dissent. At the Conservative Political Action Conference in early 2025, Milei literally handed Elon Musk, then in charge of the recently established and entirely manufactured Department of Governmental Efficiency, a chainsaw as a symbol of their shared agenda of seizing and destroying the administrative state, common goods, and natural resources in the ultimate expression of neoliberalism to maximize profit through deregulation and privatization, enabled through authoritarianism by decree. Much like his U.S. counterpart, Milei wields criminalization of workers, of protest, of dissent, to advance his economic and political agendas. Cementing the relationship between the two regimes, in September 2025, the U.S. gave Argentina a $20 billion credit bailout in an effort to shore up the nation's economy and its relationship with its ally in Latin America, while continuing to slash and deny social benefits and destroy social programs to U.S. residents. And I definitely know about that last part. I remember the bailout, that $20 billion, and thinking like how ridiculous that was. But I didn't know what happened at CPAC because I really tried not to pay attention to what's happening at that crazy conference every year. I had no idea about that chainsaw story, right? No? I had not heard that. I have subsequently looked it up, but it's just crazy, like particularly the symbolism behind it. But it's just crazy to think about how disgusting and dangerous that symbolism is and what it has meant in terms of fostering this authoritarian bond and connection between our two countries. It's just so sickening and dangerous.
Yeah, and so much of what Elon did was cutting USAID, which there's plenty of really valuable critiques of the work that they were doing. and its ties to imperialism, and how many people have died because the support, the aid that was getting handed out isn't there anymore in terms of medication and stuff that was programs that were happening around the world.
Right.
That directly impacts people, and that no longer exist. And the tying into Chainsaw and how that is cutting up those programs, that literal metaphor.
Yeah.
Literal metaphor is not a thing, but you know what I mean.
Right.
So that's it was gross,
disgusting
at the time.
Yes.
And it's gross now.
Yeah,
too.
it still is.
And yeah, you really didn't see those images of him.
I didn't. Again, I think I see CPAC in my mind, just like protect yourself.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, so one of the other things I appreciated about YoNoFui and the way they talk about this was a parallel that they illustrate throughout. And they connect the way that state violence is wrapped up in the normal neoliberal, quote unquote, democratic structures, and how that violence is connected to other forms of violence.
Yeah.
So they say, quote, as indigenous feminists in Latin America have pointed out using the concept of cuerpo territoria, body territory, this reality links misogynist and transphobic attacks on the bodies of people of marginalized genders to authoritarian attacks on the body politic to extractive attacks on the land and nature. So this connection between state violence on persons and the control, repression, and violence against the populace are deeply intertwined.
Yes.
As is the desire for control and dominion over the land, which we've seen as a distinct element of colonialism.
Yeah.
Which we also talked about in Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women by Sylvia Federici.
Yes.
These elements of dominion and how people, men typically, wanted to have control and ownership, so to speak, over the land, and some of the parallels between that desire for ownership and the control of women in that context.
Yes. Wow.
And so we see this pattern continue here, and its undercurrent of control is evident in all of it. And one of the ways I see the interlocking nature of systems of oppression is that element of control. It's such an important point that illustrates the necessity for collective liberation that undoes all of it, because it's so ingrained in us that we don't necessarily notice it at all. So we don't see that so many of these elements are here for control, and so then we don't necessarily notice that it's wrapped up in all of this. It's wrapped up in the capitalist, white supremacist, imperialist patriarchy that Bell Hooks talks about.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, to me, it's this really powerful example. The parallel that you talk about there is a really powerful example of how this exists at both the micro and the macro level, right? And YoNoFui is doing some incredible political education work here as it relates to that. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that to the table. One of the other things that I appreciated in the zine was getting to learn more about YoNoFui's approach to resistance, because it felt centered in this idea of survival, which I think just feels so pressing and necessary given the authoritarian regime that is there, that is kind of everywhere, and the real dangers that those types of regimes inflict on real people. And so they say this in the zine, quote, in this moment of attack or be attacked, YoNoFui describes an overwhelming drive to resist in whatever ways they can, while building new strategies for survival at every scale, from the micro to the macro level. The group also emphasizes the need to reassess strategies in real time as conditions change. All of our old slogans and struggles are out of time, are not of this world anymore. Subject to heightened state surveillance, filming, and doxing by trolls, and attacks on the street, YoNoFui reports activists taking on a kind of wartime persona as part of mounting an embodied counter-offense. This has prompted the collective to make transfeminist and anti-carceral interventions in mass movements, including combating transphobia and carceral feminism in feminist movements against femicide, and centralizing themes of anti-racism and the erasure of BIPOC communities through a history of genocide as part of the broad anti-fascist resistance against Melee. And I just thought that was really great because, again, it names how their work, I think, is laser focused on the survival of their people, first and foremost. But it also names a strategy and a focus on their strategy and how important it is to evolve that strategy, to build new strategies, to adapt those strategies to meet the need, whatever that might be, which I think is an important takeaway for this, for all of us, but certainly for other collectives like YoNoFui and other organizations that are trying to do similar work in other places.
Yeah, I think the clarity around strategy is really helpful for people as they're trying to figure out how to approach the work that's in front of them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Having that clarity is helpful no matter what, along with some flexibility, because the strategy has to be flexible.
Absolutely.
But so there's a section of this that I think is part of their strategy where they're talking about creative resistance. And I want to highlight this because they quote, "Steward a school for political education, supporting learning on mental health, sexual issues, digital tools, and handicrafts. This builds on YoNoFui's emergence out of poetry workshops and marks a decision to formalize these educational efforts by threading together spaces often held apart, like the prison and the school." I think this kind of creativity blended with political education is something I'd love to see more of everywhere.
Yes.
And it's happening in some places, but it's just more of it, please.
Yeah.
It's such an important connection to blend our imagination with our ability to visualize something beyond the systems we live within and create something along the way.
Yes.
Whether that's a collage or a zine or some kind of kit to help people with their mental health or with sexual issues or what have you.
Yep.
The creativity to be able to blend political education with creating something, I think is really key to creating whatever the future is that we want to see.
Right, and making it possible for us to do that. I think that's why we were both drawn to YoNoFui when we first learned about them in that episode that you mentioned. And so they're doing that so brilliantly. So I appreciate that. I talked about political education earlier, and this kind of relates to what you're talking about, the things that they're doing brilliantly. I think political education is one of them. One of the things that they're doing is challenging the normalization of prisons. And so I pulled this quote. They said, "As a collective founded around arts and creative writing, YoNoFui plays with language as part of imagining a new future beyond punishment and inviting the public to question the normalization of prisons. Increasingly connected with queer movements, last year YoNoFui members and many others created a queer contingent at a protest to reclaim the queerphobic term monster. They used this as an opportunity to occupy and disrupt heteronormative public space. YoNoFui has also transformed the word prison to torture centers in an effort to evoke continuities between the mass state violence of Argentina's authoritarian past in the 1970s to the present, and to illuminate current violence as an inheritance from the previous dictatorship, even in a so-called democracy." And so, again, I really appreciated all of that, particularly the piece about the political education of it all, but also their work to rename prisons as torture centers, I think really showcases and makes clear to everyone, like just how evil and despicable and dangerous prisons are and what is actually happening there and within the entire carceral system, in fact. And so I think that's a way to continue to bring people into this work and educate them on why abolition is necessary, and it's the only way forward.
Yeah, I think that the language that we're able to use to corrupt external mainstream narratives, I think, is really powerful.
Yes,
and we're gonna read and talk about No Cop City, No Cop World soon.
Yes.
I believe you're gonna bring that to the table in a few weeks.
Spoiler alert.
And one of the things that they did is the reason why we know it is Cop City is because of organizers in Atlanta said, no, this is actually a city that cops will have and use for training.
Absolutely.
And so it illustrated the point fundamentally for people who didn't know what the thing
didn't understand what it was.
It makes real and makes clear the ambivalent title of police training center or whatever it was called before.
Absolutely.
And this is similar to that of let's call prisons torture centers because ultimately, in a lot of ways, that's what's happening.
That is exactly what's happening there. And people can grasp that and understand, oh my gosh, torture.
Right.
I'm not for that.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah.
It flips the common acceptance, the norm on its head.
Absolutely.
For us to think about it differently.
Yeah.
That language could be really powerful.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How does this zine apply to our day-to-day lives and work? My application comes from a quote from Andrea Ritchie when she introduced the conversation with YoNoFui that created this zine.
Yes.
So she said, quote, "Criminalization is instrumental to advancing right-wing authoritarian and fascist agendas and regimes, and interrupting it is essential to resisting them. This is why abolitionist organizing to confront, challenge, and interrupt criminalization, policing, punishment, and deportation is essential in this moment." so too is it essential to build infrastructure for community survival rooted in transformative justice that can hold our community's needs and navigate conflict and harm outside of the surveillance and violence of the state, practicing a different future than the current administration imagines for us. As we do that, it is also essential to organize across walls, to care for and fortify those who have been criminalized for resistance, especially because more of us will be there. This moment also requires us to organize across borders to resist the consolidation and cooperation of right-wing and authoritarian regimes globally. And I think so much of this captures why I believe we need abolition and why I keep talking about it and thinking about it.
Yes.
The undercurrent of control and violence that we talked about earlier is ever present in white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy. And it's enforced through criminalization.
Yes.
And that criminalization is enacted by police and prisons. But the underlying theme is the criminalization of people.
Yeah.
And so if we can undo those things, and we understand how those things operate, then we can undo them, and then we can find a new world, and we can prefigure it, and we can start practicing it now.
Yeah.
And that's what I think Andrea is pointing out here in this introduction to the conversation is it's essential to do these things and to build this infrastructure because ultimately the road that we're heading down is all grounded in that fascist and that authoritarian worldview and outlook and sense of control over people, land, everybody.
And everything.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I chuckled when you started to read it because you absolutely stole my idea for application. Because I thought Andrea's analysis there about criminalization and about organizing and fighting against authoritarianism and fascism was just so spot on and so profound. I read that and it stopped me in my track. And that was the very beginning of the zine. I mean, I was like, all right.
A few pages in.
Andrea killing it. I also felt really compelled by her call to action there to be intentional about organizing across walls, as she said, across borders, across oceans. So the ways that we collectively organize and fight against and defeat fascism and authoritarianism in one place are 100% informative and instructive and helpful to those efforts in other places as well. And so I completely co-sign that application and thank Andrea for her brilliance there because it was great. And I'm sure it did wonders to kick off the conversation that they had at this gathering. So again, I co-signed that application. The other thing that sort of comes to mind since you stole my application, or we're sharing it, I'll say, is that I appreciated learning more about YoNoFui's usage of the term alternative justices, as opposed to transformative justice. So I pulled the quote where they talk about this. They say, quote, "The plural of justices emphasizes that every situation of harm needs to be responded to in a unique way, not through a centralized one-size-fits-all model. This plurality of justices includes indigenous justice, ancestral justice, mad justice, and other localized forms of justice. Part of the aim is to resist the co-optation of concepts like restorative justice and human rights, which have often become hegemonic and served the state. YoNoFui is currently finishing a book about alternative justices that they are translating into English to bring more global South perspectives into the conversation on abolition." So I think there's a lot of applicability there, right? And lessons to learn from their thinking about alternative justices. And so I'm really looking forward to, I'm going to put a pin in this book that they're writing, and definitely want to check it out once it has been translated to English and we can get our hands on it.
Yeah, it sounds like homework.
Yeah, hey.
Speaking of, what do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today?
Yeah.
My homework is to continue to follow this series. This is volume 1.
Yes.
So I believe there will be more coming from this Transformative Justice Under
so,
Authoritarian
right?
series. Yeah. So if this is volume 1, hopefully there are more volumes on the way at some point. So we'll definitely read those and talk about them right here. So yeah, how about you?
Yeah, hopefully many more that we can read. I was digging through their website, Interrupting Criminalization's website, and I noticed that they have just recently published a new resource called Abolitionist Guide to New York City, to NYC, which is intended to be this accessible guidebook. I think they're still building it and fleshing it out, but it's intended to be this accessible guidebook with a historical and geographic survey of the jails and prisons in Manhattan. Cool. And I don't know that we'll necessarily bring that to the table, though who knows, but I was clicking through it and it piqued my curiosity. And so I kind of want to dig into it and check it out just to see what we could learn from it. But I just think they're publishing so many incredible resources. So this is just yet another one that they have. So, yeah.
All right. Good stuff. Great homework. We'll keep following Interrupting Criminalization right here.
Yes.
All right, Damien, you're up next time.
Yeah.
What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
Well, I'm really excited. I just said this to Aaron before we got started, but I'm going to bring a couple of pieces from The Forge to the table for us to talk about next week. And that is going to be our 250th episode.
Nice.
Which is really exciting, right? 250.
We got there quicker than the U.S.
Yes, we did. So The Forge, our friends over at The Forge, recently partnered with an organization called Liberation in a Generation to publish a special edition focused on the importance and necessity of curbing corporate power and the influence that corporations and big business have on our lives, on our communities, and certainly on the economy. And so when I was clicking through this, it looks like there are 8 pieces, including an introductory piece in this special edition, which is so awesome. So I'm going to bring that introductory piece and one of the other pieces / case studies to the table for us to talk about next week. And then maybe we can revisit the rest of the pieces throughout the year, if that sounds good. All right. So the introductory piece is called The Corporate Power of It All. It was written by Adem Sengel and Emmanuel Nieves, who are both at the Liberation in a Generation organization. And then we'll also read The Contours of Corporate Power, which is a conversation between Catherine Diaz from Liberation in a Generation, and she's interviewing Sophia Lopez from the Texas Organizing Project organization, and Corinne Hendrickson, who is a co-founder of the Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed organization. And what both of them and their organizations have done to resist and fight back against corporate greed in their respective communities. So, and it just, I was peeking through it a little bit, and it looks like they had a really riveting conversation. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this in this new series and see what more we can learn about it next time.
Yeah, that sounds great. Journalism to dig into how corporate power is shaping things, I think is always needed and is always difficult to do in a corporate media landscape.
Yes, it is.
I appreciate The Forge doing some of that work in this movement media landscape.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.